All right, diving right in today. We're looking at this pretty major development, the ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah.
Yeah, really significant.
You sent over some fascinating stuff to get into. We've got those boots-on-the-ground reports from the AP, and then the political angle from CNBC, and even a European perspective from the German news site Tagesschau.de.
So we're aiming to figure out, what this ceasefire actually means for everyone.
Yeah, exactly. It's not just about Israel and Hezbollah, right? This impacts the whole region, potentially the whole world.
Definitely a pivotal moment, and these sources, they really show how complicated it all is.
Absolutely. And I think, there might be some surprises in here, things people wouldn't expect.
Oh, for sure.
Like, did you realize this ceasefire is actually based on an agreement from way back in 2006?
Oh, wow.
But, and this is key, there are some big differences this time around.
Right, that could be make or break.
Exactly. And then we've got major players like the U.S. and France, stepping in to broker this deal.
Big power moves.
Their involvement, well, it could signal some major shifts coming up. We'll have to see.
Those nuances are crucial to understanding the whole situation.
Okay, so let's lay the groundwork here.
Yeah, sounds good.
This ceasefire, it officially started just a few hours ago, early Wednesday morning, November 27th, 2024, 4 a.m. local time.
Putting a pause on, almost 14 months of intense fighting between Israel and Hezbollah?
It's been a long, grueling conflict, for sure.
Yeah, and just think this pause, this break, it was orchestrated by some heavy hitters on the world stage.
Absolutely. Both the U.S. and France were essential in getting this agreement hammered out.
Yeah, it wasn't easy.
I saw that in the AP article, President Biden was calling this ceasefire good news.
Yeah, I saw that too.
And then over that Tagesschau.de report, Macron's talking about a new chapter for Lebanon.
Some strong words for sure.
Strong words, yeah. But I'm curious, what makes this ceasefire different from that 2006 one? It's modeled after it, right?
Yeah. That's what's so interesting. See, in 2006, after the Second Lebanon War, it was all about disarming Hezbollah.
Right.
Bringing in all those international forces to keep the peace.
Sort of an outside-in approach.
Exactly.
But this time,
it feels like a shift.
Yeah, a shift in focus.
The agreement really stresses the Lebanese government, them taking control of their own territory.
Stepping up.
And making sure Hezbollah doesn't rearm.
So more of trusting Lebanon to handle its own business.
Yeah, you could say that.
I could see how some might view that as a positive step for Lebanon sovereignty.
Sure, yeah.
But, isn't it kind of a gamble, too?
A big one, for sure. The stakes, they couldn't be higher at this point.
Reading that AP report, it really hit me, the human cost of this whole thing.
Yeah, it's been devastating.
Over 3,760 people killed by Israeli fire in Lebanon, and then at least 75 deaths in Israel just from Hezbollah attacks.
Awful numbers.
Really puts it all in perspective, And sometimes it's easy to forget how this even started.
It has been going on for a while now.
Hasn't it? It feels like forever ago.
Mm-hmm.
It was back in October 2023, right?
Uh-huh.
When Hezbollah started firing into northern Israel.
Yeah, they came out saying they were supporting the Palestinians after Hamas launched that huge attack in southern Israel.
Right, which kicked off the whole Gaza war that's still raging today.
Exactly. It's these layers upon layers of conflict. It's tough to keep track sometimes.
And speaking of layers, that CNBC article, they were really digging into the political side of all this.
Mm-hmm.
They pointed out that President-elect Trump's team, they're already tying this ceasefire to his upcoming term.
Interesting.
Hinting at potential policy changes, once he's back in office.
Right, and we have to remember, Trump's way of dealing with the Middle East, it's been pretty different from Biden's.
Yeah, totally different approaches.
So it's reasonable to expect some shifts in U.S. involvement, going forward.
Absolutely. And it's not just the U.S. calling the shots, right?
Yeah.
That Tagesschau.de article, they highlighted some European concerns.
What were they worried about?
Well, whether the Lebanese government can actually keep Hezbollah's weapons under wraps, apparently their track record on that hasn't been so great.
I saw similar doubts in the AP reporting, too.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's a lot of back and forth disagreements about whether Israel has the right to launch strikes if they think Hezbollah has broken the ceasefire terms.
So it's even with this agreement in place, things are still really tense.
For sure. And that's what makes these sources so fascinating to unpack. This ceasefire, it's really just the starting point, not the finish line.
It's hitting pause on the fighting, but not stop.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, it feels like there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of different factors at play here.
A lot to keep track of, for sure.
That's why I think it's so important to pay attention to the details, even those seemingly small things.
The small things, like
Well, like, take that issue of Hezbollah rearming. That's a big one.
Right.
That Tagesschau.de report, it mentions that the Lebanese government, they're supposed to prevent any weapons sales, any manufacturing that could, like, benefit Hezbollah.
Okay, yeah, I remember that.
But here's the thing. A very similar provision, like the exact same idea,
Uh-huh.
was in the 2006 agreement, too.
Oh, really?
And guess what? Hezbollah still managed to, like, build up this huge arsenal.
So it didn't really work the first time around.
Right, so you gotta wonder,
Yeah,
why would they include it again if it was so ineffective before?
that's a good question.
It makes you question, like, the Lebanese government's ability.
Right, can they actually do it?
Or even, their willingness. Do they even want to enforce these restrictions?
I guess that adds a whole other layer of complexity.
For sure. And then it also, it highlights the role of those external players, like we were talking about before.
Like Iran.
Exactly. They've been a major supplier of weapons to Hezbollah for years.
Right, okay.
And this ceasefire, it doesn't really address that dynamic at all.
That's concerning.
Oh,
Yeah, it is. It makes me think back to that CNBC article, how they were emphasizing Netanyahu's view on Iran as, like, the primary threat to Israel. It's like, for Israel, this ceasefire with Hezbollah, it's just one small piece of a much bigger, more complicated puzzle.
It is, you're right. It's like they're trying to contain Hezbollah, weaken Iran's influence in the region.
But, I mean, isn't that a really risky strategy?
It is, because they're relying on a lot of things they can't control.
Like whether the Lebanese government will actually play ball.
Yeah, exactly.
It all comes back to trust, doesn't it?
It does.
Or the lack of it, I should say.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where those on-the-ground interviews in the AT article were so powerful. You really get a sense of that from people on both sides.
Yeah, that human element is essential.
Hearing from people in Israel and Lebanon, you could feel this mix of relief, like they're grateful the fighting has stopped,
Of course.
but also this deep skepticism, like, can this really last?
Well, they've seen ceasefires fall apart before.
Exactly. So it's like they're almost like bracing themselves for the next round of fighting.
It's understandable given their experiences.
What struck you the most from those interviews? Anything surprising?
I think it was just that feeling of weariness. These people have been living under this threat of violence for so long.
Yeah, it's been years.
They want peace. They desperately want it.
Like they've been hurt before.
Yeah, you can sense that they're almost resigned to the fact that this might not be the end.
It's heartbreaking, really.
It is. And we can't ignore that. The psychological impact of this conflict, the trauma,
Right.
it shapes how people see things, how they interpret events. It fuels that mistrust we were talking about.
It makes it even harder to achieve lasting peace.
Yeah, it's a vicious cycle.
And then there's, the economic cost. We can't forget about that.
The devastation.
That AP article, it had these images, these heartbreaking pictures of destroyed buildings, infrastructure, just like in ruins, entire communities uprooted.
It's hard to see.
I mean, how do you even begin to rebuild after all of that?
Yeah, it's a monumental task, and it's easy to focus on the casualties, the immediate loss of life.
Right, which is, of course, the most tragic part.
But the economic dimension, the long-term impact, that's massive.
Absolutely.
That Tagesschau.de report, it mentioned that, like, over 800,000 people in Lebanon have been displaced just from this latest round of fighting.
800,000. Wow.
It's incredible, and many of them, they're fleeing to neighboring Syria.
Oh, gosh.
Which just adds to the humanitarian crisis there. We're talking about, a whole generation scarred by this conflict.
It feels like, this ceasefire, this pause in the fighting, as important as it is, it's really just the tip of the iceberg, like a temporary fix.
It is. It is. We have to ask ourselves, does this ceasefire actually get at the root causes of this conflict?
Right. Is it a Band-Aid or a real solution?
Right. Exactly. Does it create a path, a sustainable path towards peace?
Or is it just hitting the pause button, delaying the inevitable?
And that brings us back to, the elephant in the room.
The Gaza war.
Yeah, the ongoing war in Gaza.
We can't talk about this Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire without acknowledging that, how connected it all is.
Absolutely not. The Gaza conflict, it adds another layer of complexity, another layer of unpredictability.
It's a whole other can of worms.
And like the AP article pointed out, this ceasefire doesn't even touch the situation in Gaza.
Oh, wow.
It's like trying to put out a fire in one room while the flames are raging next door.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really powerful analogy.
It is. And it makes you wonder, what happens if the conflict in Gaza escalates? Could that pull Lebanon back in? Could it reignite the fighting there?
It's a scary thought.
It's a very real possibility, and that's why we need to understand this ceasefire, this agreement, in its full context, all the factors involved.
Absolutely.
It's a positive step, no doubt.
Right.
But it's far from a guaranteed solution. It's just the beginning.
So much hinges on what happens next.
It does.
For our listener, for someone trying to follow all this, what should they be looking for? What are the signs that this ceasefire might actually hold?
Okay, well, first and foremost, we need to see action, not just words. Right.
Show me, don't tell me.
Exactly. So, is Hezbollah truly withdrawing their forces from southern Lebanon? Are they staying away from that border area?
And what about Israel? Are they holding up their end of the bargain?
Yeah, are they exercising restraint? Are they giving this a fair chance to work? Or are they, looking for any excuse to strike back? It's all about those early warning signs, right? Seeing who's sticking to the plan and who might be pushing the limits. But yeah, it goes beyond just, troops and weapons. We have to look at the politics, too. It's all connected.
So the Lebanese government, they're a key player here.
Absolutely. Can they actually enforce this agreement? That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Do they have the guts, the power to stand up to Hezbollah if they need to?
Or will they just cave under pressure?
That's a real concern. And then, of course, there's Iran lurking in the background.
Always a factor, right?
They've got so much sway over Hezbollah, it's undeniable.
Yeah.
So how do they react to this whole thing? Are they going to try to sabotage it from the sidelines? Or will they, maybe surprise us and take a more helpful approach?
And then, just to throw another wrench in the works, we got the Trump factor.
Oh, yeah. Can't forget about
The incoming administration, what are they going to do? It's a big unknown.
Huge wild card. Will they stick with Biden's playbook, trying to make peace through those diplomatic channels? Or are we going back to America first, where it's all about Israel's interests no matter what?
It's a lot to wrap your head around.
Yeah.
Honestly, even after all this, the future feels really murky.
Yeah, uncertainty's a given in this part of the world, that's for sure.
It's like we're standing on the edge of a cliff, no idea what's at the bottom.
But hey, that's where good analysis comes in, right? You don't have to be overwhelmed. We've given your listener a good foundation to understand this whole situation, the key players, the things that could go wrong.
Potential landmines.
Yeah, exactly. So now it's about staying informed, looking at the news with a critical eye, and connecting the dots as things develop.
Love that. We're not just handing them the news. We're showing them how to think about it.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
Make them active participants, not just passive consumers.
And that's what these deep dives are all about.
They're rewarding, You dig deep, you start to see those connections, and suddenly the world makes a little more sense, even the messy parts.
This one's been especially insightful, I have to say. We started with those headlines about a ceasefire. And now look at us.
Yeah, we've come a long way.
We've got this much deeper understanding of everything, the history, the politics, the human cost. It's all intertwined.
And hopefully your listeners feeling empowered now, ready to keep learning about this, to stay curious and engaged as things keep changing.
Because this is just the beginning, right? The ceasefire, it's just one step on a very long, very unpredictable road.
Yeah, the story's far from over, but the more we understand, the better equipped we are to navigate it.
Could have said it better myself. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, everyone. Remember, stay informed, stay curious, and stay engaged. That's how we make sense of a complex world. We'll see you next time. If you enjoy our daily news podcast and want to stay updated, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the bell for notifications. Your support really helps us bring you the latest news every day. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.